Donahue, a preacher, a TV critic, a bunch of mildly outraged mothers, and a couple of middle-aged dudes debate the campaign to clean up TV. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to another Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike, and I'm here with Rick.
Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to be talking about, I would say, and maybe slightly forgotten, but iconic of its time figure and talk show.
I would agree.
Donahue, hosted by Phil Donahue. Mm-hmm. Talk show was on, 26 years?
Yeah, he was on a long time.
Yeah. And
into the mid-90s.
Certainly a fixture in the 80s, the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, fixture of daytime television for sure.
Yeah. Eventually supplanted by Oprah and others. And I think you did some background reading on old Phil, right?
Yeah, I mean, just to get a little background. I mean, he started out as a journalist, but even before that, he was in school. He was raised Catholic and grew up in Cleveland, the Cleveland area, and it tried some different things. And it took him a while to find this job, and he kind of stumbled into being a talk show host. Actually, an opportunity came up like on local TV, and he kind of just developed this format. Grew the Donahue Show really in Chicago, and was in Chicago for years, and then switched to New York. Apparently, possibly booted out by Oprah, or just kind of to get away from Oprah's, after Oprah was, kind of putting him in her shadow.
Right.
And but had another successful run and had kind of an interesting career in the talk show. And I think it's easy to forget how influential he was. We have the whole trash TV and daytime TV with Maury Povich, Jerry Springer and the like, but Phil Donahue predated all of those, and he was no stranger to controversial and sometimes even absurd topics. He infamously wore a dress one time for an episode on transvestitism, and yeah, he married to Marlo Thomas for years, and that's maybe one of the more enduring celebrity marriages. And the material I was reading indicated that made some allusions to the fact that Phil is pretty well liked, but Marlo not so much. That maybe her image is a little bit of a facade, but that's beyond our scope. But yeah, I think Phil is kind of forgotten, and I think today he's more remembered for like his political stances, and which he demonstrated on his show. But I don't think he's remembered as much for being like such a pioneer in daytime television as he was.
Do you think this format, I mean, there was a talk show before his, so some version of that existed, but I feel like he invented this type of talk show.
Yeah. Like as far as like having people and like going out into the mic and the audience with a microphone, having callers,
yeah,
just sort of like all these forms of interaction kind of at once going on,
and kind of focusing on one topic.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was pretty, like for an hour long in this format. I think was pretty unique to him on a national basis. I don't think anybody else was really doing this.
A wide range of topics.
Yeah,
a lot of them very serious topics, and like you said, some maybe a little not serious or entertainment people or something. I don't remember a lot of that. I mean, not that I watch this a ton, but I do remember, like, this is another thing I remember kind of watching with my mom some during the day when she was home. Certainly remember it always being around and him. I think it helps. He's got a very specific look to him. The big glasses and the mop top hair. And,
yeah, the white hair.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of remember when it wasn't white or when it was more salt and pepper, but then, yeah. The white does stand out.
Yeah, I think...
and the microphone.
Yeah, and his audience was definitely like women, what were then called housewives of the day, and that's who was like the primary audience. I mean, it's, even in like the studio audience and the people at home, and it was a time, just like kind of daytime soap operas, that was one of the main options, and its peak, it was a very popular show, although one thing I was reading was it took it a long time to get into like New York and Los Angeles. For some reason, it was on for years in Chicago, and that was its base, and then it was widely syndicated. But I don't think it took. I think it took him to like the late '70s or something to get like a New York station, basically. But he also had like a lot of celebrities on, and so he would do those, and it seems like he's sort of known for his liberal politics, but it seems like really he was after ratings, and he would. I think he even said sometimes that, look, what he's after is like what'll get people to watch, and like every now and then you can make like open-minded or statements about being open-minded to everybody and giving people voices, but I think he was a little bit more open about like his commercial instincts and just wanting to put on a show that was popular and get good ratings. But when they would actually talk about topics, he would invariably take like the more left-wing side of it. But I think he also does a pretty good job of giving people their voices. When he has guests on with opposing viewpoints, I think he tries to give them a fair opportunity. And maybe I think in later years he might have been caricatured a little bit, but I think he does a pretty good job of trying to give both points of view and the people in the audience as well.
The episode we're going to talk about, he struck me as he was trying to keep his point of view out of it a little bit.
He was. I think he held back for quite a while, too.
Yeah. But he also seemed to be, he is liberal, we know that, but there seemed to be like a word we used before, kind of a humanist aspect to him, too. That he was kind of like genuine, he wasn't just giving everyone a chance to talk, but he seemed genuinely compassionate to what they were saying and interested in what they were saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a few comments where he seemed a little condescending. Yeah. But I think overall I'd agree with that assessment. Yeah. I mean, I guess he denounced like Catholicism on grounds of like, some of their viewpoints, and I think mainly like from a feminist viewpoint, he became a pretty strong feminist, I think. So. Yeah,
like he did an exchange with a Russian broadcaster.
Oh yes, Vladimir Posner.
Right, and they later had a show together on CNBC.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they had a summit, and so I guess it made him pretty well known in Russia. So he went over to Russia and stuff, and he was a pretty well known figure over there. And so he had a pretty long and distinguished career, and I guess I think he shows up every now and then as a voice. And he was also on as a correspondent on the Today Show. I'd forgotten about this, but for several years he was a regular correspondent, and then he would come back later and make some appearances. I think he guest hosted for a while every now and then, but he had kind of a sporadic relationship with the Today Show. And did a few other things, but it seemed like the bread and butter was definitely this Donahue show. He met Marlo Thomas, I think, when she was a guest. I think, and there's like actually footage of, you can see them like the first time they met. It was on air, I think.
Okay.
And you can kind of see that they're pretty. There's something there between them. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
So good for the two of them.
Yeah.
They're still around in their 80s.
And he did a spit take on Letterman.
Oh, good for him.
I think that might be what I watched that clip, and I got that was one of the reasons we started talking about this show as a possibility. Yeah. That the good old Don Giller put up a series of clips where Danny Thomas and Marlo Thomas had come on and done spit takes. And of course, Danny Thomas was famous for that. And he got Donahue to do one too. Yeah, I mean, I know I didn't watch it yet, but on YouTube there's an episode of Donahue of him talking to Letterman.
Yeah,
I want to watch.
I saw that was available, and I mean, I think there's a lot of Donahue around. If you want to look for it, and maybe especially if you know like a specific guest that was on there, it might be easier to find it some ways. It's not like labeled neatly, but I found like there's a pretty good mixture too, like some of the issues and some of the celebrities, and either way you can get a pretty good idea of what Donahue's about by going to YouTube and watching some of these old clips. Yeah, but that's the only place you'll see him. I don't really know of anybody even talking about this show in recent years.
No, not really. That's too bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Merv Griffin has had some DVDs come out, and with like the Seinfeld thing kind of keeps his name out there. The fact that there's a rerun of the Seinfeld that's sort of built around the Merv Griffin show. Right. Even Mike Douglas, Rosie O'Donnell was like a big backer of Mike Douglas. Yeah. And Phil Donahue's a little bit, I consider him a little bit more than those, like slightly different generation than those two maybe, but for a guy that had a broadcast, big broadcast for like, over 25 years or whatever, it seems like maybe people should remember a little bit more than they do.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't care about that.
Maybe not, yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I'm not sure where you would expect to see them or anything, but...
No, I mean, but they are, well, like anything like that would be a pretty good time capsule of different eras, and I think they could be useful for that, to see not just what people were wearing, but what people were talking about, and maybe how they were talking about issues that are going on today, and how the conversations change or how it hasn't.
Right. I mean, and they did some pretty radical things, like reading about now. Apparently, they did a live birth on the air. They did an abortion on the air, like in the very early days of the show. Like, I'm not sure if that was in the national version or, but yeah, I mean, it it was pretty wild. I mean, they would put a lot of different things on there, and it seems like, you know, to talk about just basic subjects like race and capitalism and anything, and probably not afraid to kind of put like a pretty liberal viewpoint out there.
Yeah.
But he would also have like David Duke on or something like that, and
Right.
interview like people like that. And I think his very first guest was Madeline Murray O'Hare, the famous atheist.
Oh,
I think that
right.
was the very first guest he had on the show.
Yeah.
And it was like
I don't remember hearing about like fights breaking out or any of that kind of stuff.
No,
Maybe something happened, but
yeah, I don't think they had a lot of that going on.
yeah.
I mean, I guess they kept it under wraps.
Right.
Which maybe speaks a little bit more to the authenticity of the show, and that it wasn't so much a circus. Even though I really think it took him a while to live down that image of him in a dress.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what defined him for a while. But really, compared to what came after him, it was a lot more reasonable show than some of the stuff that's on there now, which is pretty much, you know, scripted, probably pretty much, and definitely a different thing.
Or to quote one of the guests, they're toilet shows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Phil Hartman did
Yeah.
an impression of him on SNL, right?
Yeah, I think, and like kind of running around with the microphone.
Yeah.
And what I always liked about him, and my friends and I, we used to kind of make fun of this too, just like the sort of labored way he would ask a question. You're just kind of like, you know, and like kind of with a wishy-washy, you know, tone, and kind of almost like he's not really lecturing, but trying to get to something, but it would take him a lot while, and then he just kind of like, a very distinctive way of asking questions. It's kind of amusing.
Yeah. The episode we're going to talk about is maybe is appropriate for our show. It's about the magic of podcasting. No.
Yeah, amazing that he got
Boy,
that.
if well, I don't know what his health situation is. He should do a podcast.
I'm surprised he doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess being 80, maybe he's like,
Yeah, maybe he
I
doesn't
don't have time for that.
feel the need for it.
Yeah. But it would be good. No, it's about the campaign to clean up TV.
Yeah, which apparently originated from a church in Tennessee.
Yes.
There was a British equivalent that was apparently much more famous, because when I tried to research this, all the hits were coming up for some UK effort started by somebody else, like in the 60s or something.
By the actor John Hurt?
Unfortunately, not the actor John Hurt.
Yes.
Clean up TV because, you know,
Yeah.
it's a threat to movies.
This is started by, or at least the person speaking about it is a preacher from Tennessee named John Hurt.
Yes.
But he's not the actor John Hurt. From Jolton, Tennessee, just outside Nashville. It's a Church of Christ church.
Okay. And this was from February of 1981. So,
Yeah.
for context, this is when it's kind of an interesting, you talk about time capsule. This is an interesting time capsule as to what was popular on TV and what people were kind of thinking about it.
Yeah. And the other guest is the Chicago Sun-Times TV critic, Gary Deeb.
Yeah,
Who, frankly, I've never heard of.
He was an interesting guy, and apparently, doing a little research, he was like a towering figure in Chicago media for years.
Wow.
He was like he was like the media critic, not just TV.
Yeah.
I think he's really great on this show, and he's got a very distinctive and forceful way of talking, and he has a kind of an intense look, like he just seems authoritative.
Yes.
Which is interesting because like shortly after this, I think he took a TV job, like a Chicago station, I think, and pretty much sold. It's considered like he was co-opted, is what the general consensus is, because he didn't criticize like shows that were on the station he was on and like whatever, and just seemed like he lost a lot of his punch from when he was a columnist, and he was. I think he worked for both major papers in Chicago over the course of his print career, but now he's retired, and there was a scandal. Sort of a little mini scandal when he auctioned off letters from Chicago media figures on eBay, and he sold them. And some of the radio figures that had sent him these personal letters or whatever got upset and one of them in particular tried to block it. But he just raised some money, and now I guess he's retired. And like trying to research him, a lot of it is like, hey, whatever happened to Gary Deeb? And so it seems like people in Chicago, he was an institution there, but not known outside Chicago. And I guess it makes sense since this was taped, Donahue was like a Chicago thing, that they would have him on as the TV critic. But I thought he was a very interesting guy.
Yeah, he had a lot of interesting opinions. And,
Yeah.
Not all that I agreed with, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was interesting because a lot of times their opinions sort of intersected.
Yeah.
And then they would diverge, but there was definitely, or they were coming at the same idea from totally different points of view.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of assumed that they'd be like diametrically opposed at first.
Yeah.
And that the TV critic would be like, oh, no, censorship is bad and everything like this. But he was kind of going at it just more from like practical grounds and
Right.
taking some different angles on some things than I expected, which was interesting.
I mean, it took a while for them to introduce him, and I didn't know who he was, but the first thing he said, at least in the version we watched, which I mean, it looked like somebody filming their TV.
Yeah.
In 1981. I don't know what happened there.
A weird kinescope.
Yeah,
homemade,
but like Donahue doesn't have his mic on, and he's sitting on it, and Gary Deeb says, "Oh, that's the rectal mic."
Yeah, that's right.
It seems once you get to know him on there, it seems very out of character with the rest of his attitude. But but this John Hurt guy, I mean, he comes across as reasonable, a little bit slick maybe. Mm-hmm. In a sort of down-home way.
I think he's polished and he's on message.
Yes.
And he's practiced what he's saying about it. So
he's totally equivocating the whole time.
Yeah.
The idea of his campaign is that his church and many other churches, 6,000 or something, had members, tell them what shows they found the most offensive. Mm-hmm. And from that, they came up with a list of 5 network shows and like 3 syndicated shows. And they plan to target some of the major sponsors for these shows with boycotts. Mm-hmm. Okay, that all tracks. But then he keeps saying, well, no, we're not interested in censoring, which I think in the technical use of that word is correct. That some other body has to do that. Right. But we're not interested in we're not saying these shows can't be on the air, or we're not trying to force them off the air. But honestly, I mean, that is what they're trying to do. Yeah. I mean, that's when people boycott, that's happening today with, usually Fox News, but these boycotts or protests of their advertisers, and their advertisers go away, and the idea is to try to force that show off the air.
Right.
Or punish it in some way.
It's definitely a little disingenuous the way he puts things.
Yeah.
I think he's making an effort to sound reasonable, and what he's saying is technically correct, but you're right. Like, let's get real. They want the shows off the air, and they're trying to accomplish that.
Yes, and they want other shows to, if they're going to address complicated or certain material, they want to address it in a very particular way.
Yeah, not endorsing it or making it seem lighthearted.
Yes, but even at some point he says even just showing it, automatically is an endorsement or an encouragement.
Yeah,
and I, I'm not keen to agree with that.
And a lot of what he says is he keeps saying it's not his opinion.
Yes.
He's saying it's the opinion of like the churches and the all these many followers or many people.
Right.
So it's another way he sort of tries to distance himself and kind of babyface himself a little bit.
Yeah.
However, I gotta say, it didn't seem as extreme. I mean, until like a little bit later. But some of his things, I mean, my opinion has kind of changed a little bit over the years. Like, we all thought, the Tipper Gore thing was evil, and the parents, advisory PRC, was it the parents research? Like, it was inherently evil for putting warning labels on records, and
right.
I'm not so sure that's a bad idea now. I don't. Sometimes I have a harder time understanding what was so bad about putting a warning label on a sticker. I guess the idea was that it would prevent kids from buying, like movies. It would prevent kids from getting music with objectionable language, and I think there's more room for discussion with that.
And I think some of that can be useful for parents if they pay attention. Like, I know, just talking to my brother, and especially with video games, like, some parents don't pay attention to the ratings on those, and they're pretty young kids are playing like these super violent video games.
Right.
He just took the time to do the research and would say, you can't have this game, you can have, and eased, as his son gets older, they ease the restrictions on that.
Right.
So that seems like a useful guidance. I think a lot of it, too, depends on, what is the show and what are you doing with it? Like with a TV show, like, we've talked about that Titan show on the DC Universe. And I thought I wasn't offended by the violence or profanity, anything in it because I've seen plenty of that stuff other places. But I thought like that was a bad choice for that brand.
Yeah.
Because, A, those are mainstream superheroes, but B, they're mainstream superheroes that are popular with kids in a different format, in the cartoon format, not just comics, but, and then now here's essentially a rated R version of it. Like, what's the point of that?
Yeah.
This is for the teenagers who graduated up to the next level from a goofy kid cartoon to blood and gore and
Well, I think one of the things they didn't really get into on this episode of Donahue was maybe some room for nuance. Like, I don't remember there being a lot of discussion about, like, what time it was more like either the show
Yeah.
should be on the air or not. Not like, okay, shows in the family hour, like 8 o'clock. Put it on at 10 o'clock, and then there wouldn't be as much of a problem
Right.
with it.
Yeah.
Or like now we're kind of used to like the V-chip and like these ratings, TV shows being ratings. Well, they didn't really have that system back then, but maybe
No.
that would have been useful. Like give parents more choices in order to, so that they can make decisions.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that kept coming up in like Phil, where he's being a little condescending, was, and he had a point, was like when they say, when he says, well, and actually I like the fact that he brought this up, because people say, it's a little glib to say, well, it's up to the parents. And he's saying, well, some parents don't have the luxury
Yeah.
of monitoring their kids, and he didn't really get into it, but there's maybe latchkey kids or something, and
Yeah.
not all parents. It's usually like maybe the wealthier parents that have the resources to have somebody monitoring their kids all day. So I was glad he brought up that point, but they didn't kind of really get into this. It seemed like either the argument's either they're on the air or they're not on the air.
Yeah.
That's a little simplistic.
And there was like this feeling of like people are prisoners of their TV.
Yeah.
I think it is a little glib too to say, well, just turn off the TV. On the other hand, that is an option.
It is, yeah.
And there were 3 channels. Then.
Yeah.
3 or 4 channels then. Probably Chicago had 5 or 6.
Well,
But then the audience members would be like, the woman was like, I didn't buy my TV to turn it off.
Yeah.
I bought it to watch it.
Yeah.
But I hate everything that's on it.
Right.
But I'm going to watch it. I
Yeah.
leave it on all day.
yeah. And there were a couple who kind of tried to go for the big applause lines. I think like 3 or 4 people say this, like, I really think the worst thing is the commercials are
Yes.
more offensive than anything in between. Oh, yeah, of course everybody's going to cheer for that one. But
Right.
like, okay, yeah, we get it. To skip ahead a little bit, like there was one kind of mom that got up and was bemoaning the fact that they were sitting there watching the show with their kids and Love Boat,
Yeah.
and they showed the doctor like jumping out of bed or into bed with some woman, and she was very embarrassed, like they were sitting there watching this nice show, and it's like, Love Boat? I mean... Do you think of Love Boat as anything other than the representative of this kind of like titillation TV that they're kind of talking about? I mean,
Not really. I mean, and we both watched it some as kids.
yeah,
And probably some of that went over our head. But
yeah, it was pretty much
the whole
about,
thing was about people hooking up.
yeah, it was about extramarital sex and sometimes adultery and all this kind of stuff, and leering and
Yeah.
harassment and
Right.
and I'm not ripping the show. I'm just saying I can't imagine the mentality that thinks this is a
Yeah.
good family show ruined by one scene of Doc hopping into a bed with somebody. Like
Or-
the rest of the show was good.
They'd been watching it for 5 years and suddenly realized it was about sex.
Yeah, that was very bizarre. To
And
me.
then there was another woman who had the same experience watching Hill Street Blues with her kids. And
Yeah.
there was a sex scene that didn't have anything to do with the plot.
Yeah.
But it probably had to do with the characters.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if it was that first episode and it was the bathtub scene. Well, that was a huge part of that show, revealing those
Right.
characters together. So, but also you're watching Hill Street Blues with your kids.
Yeah, that was another bizarre moment. Like, how is that considered a family show at all? Like,
Yeah.
Why would the kids even be interested in that?
Right. Why
I
are
mean,
they up?
Like, yeah, some of these things were head scratchers.
Yeah.
Did you happen to write down, because I did, maybe
list.
we can, the list of shows, the objectionable shows?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So,
And by the audience, Phil had the audience guess, and they guessed 4 out of 5 of them.
yeah, they were really good. I mean,
Yeah.
like these are the hit list. Well,
They-
John Hurt objected to
I
that,
know.
didn't he?
He did object to that.
He
but
didn't
then
like that
It
characterization.
was already in the graphics.
Yeah.
So.
These are the most objectionable shows.
Yes, it's not his opinion.
Yeah.
It's the 500,000 people that voted.
Right.
Which on the one, that's a large number, but on the other hand, based on TV viewership at the time, it's a tiny number.
Yeah. And again, that was another recurring theme, is like people being baffled by the notion of people being skeptical that Nielsen ratings actually worked.
Right.
Because, people that watch shows that they don't like were watching shows that they don't like, so people instantly disbelieve the ratings.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
I don't know how they work.
Yeah.
I know somebody's out there as a Nielsen person.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe there's less confidence in it now because of so many different ways, but back then, I mean, there weren't a lot of options, and I think their methodology was probably pretty solid enough. I mean, you can have people
Right.
argue,
But within a few,
yeah.
plus or minus 100,000 or something.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Do you want to read the list or?
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you want to you could do the broadcast shows, and I'll do the syndicated shows.
Good, because you can explain to me what one of those is.
That's right. Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. So the audience guessed Soap, Dallas, Saturday Night Live, Three's Company, and soap operas in general. Daytime soap operas. Soap, Dallas, SNL, and Three's Company were on the list, along with Charlie's Angels. So that's the broadcast ones. We've talked about 3 of those on here.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, Dallas and the soap are on the list.
On the master list, yes.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Not super surprising, some of those.
And those were all very popular shows, although...
Of course, we talked about Charlie's Angels and Three's Company not really being as naughty as their reputations.
Right. I think Gary Deeb was sort of talking about how sex being used as like a tittering thing and like a juvenile.
Yes.
Like being treated as like a tee-hee kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was almost like he wanted to be more sophisticated.
Yes.
And it was just like, almost like he would rather be more explicit or less explicit, because the way they were doing it was kind of having it both ways and straddling the fence and just kind of like, and just being just really like, oh, come on, just come out and say it or something like that. I kind of thought that's maybe what he was talking about.
Yeah, I think underneath his argument was about quality.
Yeah.
And that if you put it in the right context and treat it seriously, then there should be more of that, because that's real life.
Right.
But if you're just kind of goofing on it.
Right.
And, titillating is not, and, that's a fair argument. Three's Company is the show that he called a toilet show.
Yeah.
Which seemed a little much. But,
yeah. Man.
And he was also really down on Charlie's Angels.
Yeah. Yeah, he was, and I think he point out that the ratings had declined on that show, and he said, well, because that's a thing he said that was interesting, is like he doesn't believe in boycotting advertisers. He thinks that's useless, and just tune out the show is what he was saying.
Right. Just
stop watching, and he said, if people stop watching, then it'll have an effect.
Yeah.
And he seemed to think that was more effective than just going after advertisers. He thought that was useless.
Yeah, he thought there were too many sponsors.
Yeah. And that just
waiting
somebody
in line.
else will join. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And John Hurt's like, well, then once we get these people out of the way, we'll go after them.
Yeah.
But that does seem like it. Maybe it's not a futile thing, but maybe it would take a lot longer than just, enough people stop watching it that, it tanks.
Right. And another thing, too, I say is the discussion was very civil on this episode.
Yes.
It was a pretty friendly crowd audience-wise, but, I mean, nobody was really, like, vehemently, and they were able to say, like, I disagree with that point, and here's why, or else sometimes they had to carry a point over across a break or something like that, which is, kind of something that was probably being done before Donahue and has been done after, but, like, we'll get to that, but first we got to take a break. I'm sorry, and they come back, but Phil's, like, usually giving that person a chance to respond and finish their point to his credit and everything, and there's certainly a civility to it, and it seemed like I think a reasonably intelligent conversation, at least on the stage. And Donahue, some of the people in the audience I don't know about, but it was pretty reasonable.
I think only having 2 guests is a nice.
Yeah.
It starts to get just you get 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 like they have on some news shows now, and it's like. How's anybody going to get anything across? It's
ridiculous, yeah. And they're sitting right next to each other too, so they're not like on opposite sides of the room, and they're not, it's just a little bit more sedate atmosphere.
Yeah.
So the syndicated shows.
Yes.
Newlywed Game, not surprising.
I know what that is.
Dating Game, not surprising.
The Newlywed Game though shouldn't be.
You don't think so?
Well, they were married.
True. That is true.
And I would think sexual antics in the confines of holy matrimony is, that's fine.
Well,
because it might lead to babies.
Yeah.
And it is, but it is acceptable to do those things if you're married to most.
True, but it's definitely presented in a leering fashion.
Yes, I know.
Yes, I realize you're saying that relatively tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
No pun intended for any Newlywed Game answers there, but. The other one was Three's a Crowd.
Yes, what Three's a Crowd was that?
Not the John Ritter spinoff of Three's Company.
That's what I assumed. Was it a game show?
Yes, it was a Chuck Barris game show, which right there you
right.
Okay, but this was based on you'd have 3 people, and the premise is to decide who knows a man better, his secretary or his wife. Yeah, and. I think reaction to this show was very very negative. Critical reaction. I killed the show, and it didn't last very long. And I think it pretty much drove Chuck Barris out of television for a while.
Wow.
But So
well, hey, that sounds terrible.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious about it.
So many different ways.
Yeah, so. I've been meaning to watch some of these, and I think I'm gonna check these out. But yes, so those are the top 3, and probably not really surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of makes sense. At the time, you could make an argument like Donahue. I bet there are a lot of people upset that Donahue was talking about certain things on his show.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So they presented that at the beginning, and that kind of set the table a little bit. But then they had a pretty interesting conversation. One thing that Phil said that I want to highlight is they were talking about kind of started getting artistic merits a little bit, and Phil said that adultery is more interesting than monogamy, creatively speaking.
Yeah.
And I had to disagree with that. I'm like, that's kind of a pat thing to say. I don't think that's necessarily true.
Not necessarily, no. But
I mean, sometimes, he wasn't really saying it in a nuanced way. He was kind of saying it pretty authoritatively.
Yeah.
And it's like, Phil, I'm disappointed in you. You can have an intelligent show about monogamy, without getting into adulterous affairs.
This is true, yeah.
Phil just kind of threw that out there.
Yeah. But he was definitely more so than Gary Deeb, who you think would understand this, sort of arguing that general side of, like, the artistic point of view, creative point of view.
Yeah.
Which is, part of it was that, they got to tell interesting stories, and how are they to know what's going to offend people, or they were making some analogy like that, like,
Yeah.
if you knew your sermon was going to offend this many people, would you do it? Or something. There was something where he's like, well, they're not going to know how people are going to react. They're not going to have the foresight. It was like the deer hunter thing. Like,
right.
You're not going to know that might make 10 or 15 people mimic the Russian roulette in that.
Right. They were kind of saying, like, should you, like, sort of like pre-censorship, and do you know just because you think people might react to this? And,
Yeah.
And I think Phil kind of he raised the word elitist,
For Gary Deeb.
Yeah,
said you're being kind of elitist.
Because, he kind of came out of the gate, like you said, ripping on shows like Three's Company and Charlie's Angels, and praising shows like MASH.
Yes. Almost exclusively MASH.
Yeah.
He kept bringing up MASH.
A couple of times,
Here's an example of bathroom humor that was funny.
Yeah,
Here's
it's like a Frank Burns thing. I'm like, I'm looking forward to hearing this. And the way he told it was just funny, because he said, like, now that is funny.
Yeah. and then, they show extramarital affairs, but it's,
Yeah.
And they show this, and then, Barney Miller, he mentioned a couple times, and for having shown prostitutes and homosexuals in sort of but treating them as human beings, basically. He at least mentioned All in the Family in passing, but and Hill Street Blues, he liked that.
Yeah. John Hurt. It becomes apparent that John Hurt does not want. I mean, he kind of avoided saying this at first.
Yeah.
But then Phil got him out of it. That basically he doesn't want any depiction of homosexuality on television. Because Phil was saying, like, what if you got two guys, in bed, and they're not doing, or
not even in bed.
Yeah, they're
just happy.
That's right. They're just they're just happy. They're just living their lives and stuff. And it's like no. And then I forget how he said it, but he eventually said, like, well, he made it clear that they don't want that at all on TV.
It was a perversion in his mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Which he kind of went away from earlier he was making a little bit more sophisticated argument about, like, well, we don't want it depicted in a certain way, and then it became clear, like, no, they just don't want it at all.
Right. At first it was like, well, if you're joking about it, then it makes it seem like it's not serious.
Right. And it wasn't Phil, like, asking, like, under what circumstances would it be okay to do these things? Because the guy was
he even
not leaving any room for...
Yeah, he even said, well, if you have a show that, shows adultery, and then right at the end it shows you why it's wrong, it's still showing you the adultery and encouraging it.
Right.
So it does seem like a no-win situation.
Right. There's really no way that would make them happy, quote unquote, to show, like, adultery under those circumstances. Yeah.
Right. And he can't agree with that assessment.
Yeah, I mean,
and frankly, the idea that any behavior you see in a movie or on TV is going to make you do that thing.
Yeah, I mean,
and of course, it's the idea around homosexuality is just the idea that people can decide, or that they decide to do that because they see it, not that they're born that way or whatever.
Yeah.
An out-of-date idea, even probably in 1981. But
well, you mentioned the deer hunter, and they talked about how, like, people imitating the Russian roulette scene and causing deaths and kind of getting into, like, a causation thing in there. And isn't Phil? Didn't Phil ask Gary Deeb, like, if you wrote a column and you knew that it would?
I think the Hurt asked.
Hurt asked him that.
If you wrote a column and you knew that 10 people would kill themselves because of it, would you write it? And he's like, well, no, but
I certainly would not.
Yes. But I have no way of knowing that.
Right. Yeah, so it was kind of like, it was an interesting argument. I like this Gary Deeb guy. I just like the way he said stuff, and I didn't agree with everything he said, but he just said it. He again, I think he was good on television, and he made his points relatively concisely, and was addressing the audience and just seemed to, he came off pretty well. And I think the John Hurt guy did what he was trying to do. I mean, a little folksier way, and I think that's probably by design. He didn't want to seem as media savvy or anything like that. But
yeah, and an audience member tried to kind of trap him with, well, what do you think about this guy, this faith healer guy?
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, well, if there's a religious thing and you don't agree with it, then you shouldn't watch it.
And I think Phil didn't really have any tolerance for that. I think he was a little too off topic.
Yeah.
I don't think he really appreciated that question.
Right. Yeah, there were a few times he didn't appreciate questions. He's like, well, that doesn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Yeah.
You need to do that sometimes. Like,
right.
I hear that on radio shows sometimes when someone calls in and they're totally off track.
Right.
The host is trying to reel them in, and
it's
much harder in that situation because they're on the phone.
Yeah.
You can't give them facial cues.
Right. I mean, it's not like a private thing. I mean, you've got the whole other people like watching it or listening or whatever. And the audience was mostly seemed to be relatively on the more moralistic side of the issue. Would you not agree?
Yes. Yeah, they seemed vaguely outraged. And
Yeah.
There were a couple men. Phil called one of them a young man, and he did not look like a young man. He looked older than Phil.
The teacher? Oh, no. Yeah.
There was a teacher, and there was another guy. I don't remember what he brought up.
Yeah, it just seemed to be like a recurring theme of people watching TV and being like having a nice innocent family night and having it being ruined by something embarrassing coming on the TV and like how can they prevent this? And
yeah, like the one lady who watches TV all day and all night, but she was upset because there were so few choices during the day. Mm-hmm. I think that was the one. Or there was one who was upset about that it's either soap operas, and she finds them just horrendous. And so the other choices were I Love Lucy and cartoons.
Yeah.
And someone like Gary Deeb, somebody said, well, you watch soap operas. She's like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I watch I Love Lucy and cartoons.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So
and Gary Deeb mentioned the Three Stooges.
Yes, and he's fine with them.
Yeah.
John Hurt seemed maybe not fine with them.
Yeah, that was a little more ambiguous.
Yeah.
But that was interesting talking about. They didn't really get into the violence. It seemed to be mostly focused on like sexuality.
And I think either Phil or Gary Deeb brought that up a little bit. So conservatives tend to get more bothered by the sex than the violence.
Phil kind of made that. Like, he was kind of called them hypocrites.
Yeah.
Without really saying it, I think. That seemed definitely what he was going for, I think, there. But kind of one other thing, like near the end, I kind of like when Phil says, "Oh, no, while we got you here," and he just asked like Gary Deeb these like kind of rapid fire questions about just kind of about TV in general, and just kind of asking his take on. Oh, and another thing I want to bring up is Gary Deeb does make the point, which is kind of interesting during the show, that there's so many more choices now. He was talking about how we're getting more choices, like with cable TV and pay TV and stuff like that. So
where you can see even more offensive material.
Yeah. Exactly.
You think Love Boat is offensive?
Yeah.
Let me introduce you to a channel called Cinemax.
Yeah. And I also liked his take on he was rooting for Fred Silverman because he thinks he's really changed, and he said, oh, he was terrible when he was the head honcho at ABC, but I really think he's become a much more nobler human being. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
So he's like kind of seen the error of his ways, and I think in my when I was looking up Gary Deeb, I think there was some reference to him like one of his early reviews or something, like when he was a big supporter when it premiered of. Can you guess what show? Like that we've talked about on the podcast let me give you, it was like an NBC show kind of around the time, I guess, around this era that...
Already know Hill Street Blues. You mentioned that.
Yeah, it's not what you would think is a critical favorite.
Ah.
But apparently he was like really praised it for like...
Silver Spoons?
No, it was Real People.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I guess he maybe thought it was genuinely had like with his populist. I don't know. I have to go back and look at that, but he was a supporter of Real People. So Phil, I kind of just like how Phil like pumps him for some like TV critic stuff at the end of the end of the episode. What we got you here?
Another interesting thing is both Phil and Gary Deeb, whether they agree with this guy or not, are totally on board with the idea of boycotts and this being an act of free speech and all of that. And they're not there to decry the thing.
Right.
They just want to have a conversation about it.
Right. They say that pretty explicitly, just like you said it. Yeah, and that's good. And that's a good point because I think that that's to their credit, because a lot of people they're in favor of boycotts until it's against something they like, and then they
Right.
decry it as
Yeah.
unconstitutional or something like that.
Right.
So that was not really even on the table here.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I wonder about them sometimes if they're effective or if they affect the right people.
Yeah.
Like, I worry about them affecting the employees rather than the employers.
Well, that's an interesting argument. I mean, who should be held responsible for some of that stuff, and how do you change things? And yeah, there's probably a lot of collateral damage.
Yeah.
You could apply that to a lot of different things, but
I mean, it depends, because they talk about the civil rights boycotts, which tended to be not of corporations, but of particular...
like business owners or something.
Yeah,
or
like a small business,
right.
Which, we're supposed to like small businesses and everything, but that seems like a more effective target in a way, because one or two people you're changing minds of, not, or making an example of, not trying to boycott General Electric or something.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, in the audience especially, there's a lot of, all these people are just these big wigs making these decisions and kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Like we don't have any power. Like they felt like it was powerless and not really wanting. I think that's a good point. It's like not really wanting to acknowledge that these shows are on there because people like them is what they is probably the reality of it. And if people didn't watch them, then they wouldn't make them. And back then it was that argument was a little bit less substantial, maybe because there were so fewer choices, but as choices grew, and it probably became a little bit better that you could say like, hey, people watch it now.
Yeah, because Phil's trying to make the point, I think, to an audience member that, or no, I guess it's to John Hurt, that if the Waltons and Little House on the Prairie, if they could make more of those, why wouldn't they? Because if it's going to make them money, they're going to make. If they are these businesses and they just care about money, then they're going to do whatever's going to make them money.
Right.
Which I think is a fair argument.
I think it is.
And John Hurt's like, no, they would just put those things in.
Yeah, I mean,
they think that's what's going to get viewers, so that's what they're going to put in.
Yeah, I
Which,
think
there's some truth to that too, but we know, you watch enough TV or pay attention, that the networks just follow, not totally, but on the whole, follow what's going to get them the biggest ratings.
Yeah, I think that John Hurt was like so on message that he there wasn't any room. It seemed like they were determined to not blame viewers.
Yeah.
But to blame like people that you could boycott and target and kind of like, but make it seem like the majority of the American people, and that Phil's argument contradicts like what he's trying to kind of indicate, that it's the majority of people that are against this sort of filth and content on TV.
And yet Phil kept getting around to the idea that it also seemed like both of the guests didn't really think much of the people.
Yeah.
To make choices for themselves or do any of this.
It's interesting too that Phil is the one that would probably be caricatured. Today as like a limousine liberal or something. It would be easy to paint him with that brush. But I think in like some of what I've been seeing of him, like you could talk about his views, but he seems sincere and actually like one thing that I was reading about him is him and Marlo Thomas aggravate a lot of their neighbors. They did in the condo units and apartment buildings. They did like perpetual renovations, and I think they had got some property in Nantucket or somewhere where they wound up tearing down some historical property next to them because they thought they were afraid that somebody would subdivide it or something like that and be next to them. So you read some of those things in their personal lives, and you see like, oh, maybe they'd be kind of like, oh, well, you're not really practicing what you preach. But on the air, he seems to always be like kind of trying to stick up for the proverbial little guy or something like that, and kind of making that like sort of non-elitist argument. And in this case, I think he definitely is saying that. He seems uneasy with a lot of it. Seems like kind of getting away from just letting the people watch what they want. And that's befitting a guy that is having some controversial topics and is doing a talk show that's trying to get ratings.
Yeah. Do you think when they have an argument at home, he has to stage it like the show?
I don't know.
Like she's sitting up on a little higher chair and he's kind of down, and he has a microphone. It's not on or anything.
Yeah. He has to,
Now explain to me why we don't want more than one neighbor living in the house.
Right. And taking the microphone, getting some feedback, some callers.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you didn't have any callers here.
Yeah, no, that's true.
You get to hear him say, "Is the caller there?" But
the audience certainly seemed to be fired up, though, weren't they?
They were.
They were engaged in it. And if you talk about television, I mean, that's something that everybody touches everybody, I guess. So everybody's got an opinion on it.
And I like that they were Chicago people, and there was like something like a little bit. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe it's because I had just watched a Bears clip the other day, but they just seem to have like this little edge to them that,
Yeah.
which a New York audience would too, probably.
Yeah.
If it weren't tourists.
Yeah.
But they definitely seem just like people from town.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of them seem to have a chip on their shoulder about TV. They're just things they didn't like about it, and just kind of like that. What TV's terrible, and
Right.
it's like you said, the bigwigs
Right.
that are making these decisions, and we can't do anything about it.
Yeah. I really enjoyed watching this.
It was well paced. It moved, and I think this copy had the original commercials, didn't this episode?
No.
Or no? No, okay. I'm thinking of another one.
Yeah.
But
It did have the something I remember too, like the way the logo looked
yeah,
and would appear in different like sort of positions on the screen.
right. I mean, I remember, like, I think we were at Donahue household. I'm pretty sure my mother watched him a lot when I was growing up. So I remember him. I don't know if she was watching some of the more controversial topics.
Yeah.
Like, I remember a lot more of the issue ones. She might have been more interested in like some of like the celebrity interviews and that kind of thing, as opposed to like these hot button issues or whatever. But yeah, I think he was an effective broadcaster. And this is a very entertaining show, with a good subject, and two guests who are interesting. And to me, the breakout star is Gary Deeb. I'm gonna look for some of his TV work. But it's disappointing that there seems to be a consensus, like I said, that he was co-opted by taking a TV job and leaving the newspaper world.
Yeah, I'd be interested in reading some of his columns.
Yeah.
They seem if they have the same authoritative voice to them.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't seem like he didn't seem particularly stern, but apparently he was not afraid to like rip guys in print, and he had a reputation for, I think, somebody called him like the Wolfman or something of Chicago or something like. But he was considered like a real he's like a savage, and he'll tear down anybody. But I mean, came across as a pretty affable guy, maybe a little elitist in some of his views, but
yeah, a little intense.
Didn't really seem, and I think so. I was doing the numbers on this, and I think he was in his like mid-30s during the time of this taping.
Okay.
But he seemed pretty composed and self-assured, if nothing else.
Still don't agree with him that Three's Company's toilet the toilet show.
If anything, All in the Family is a toilet show.
Boy, yeah. The original toilet show.
Yes. Yeah, he definitely had a bone to pick about some of the most popular shows of the day, but
Yeah.
they can't all be MASH, Gary.
He didn't have anything to say about soap one way or the other, I don't think.
No,
That did seem like the outlier in that list in terms of sort of quality.
Yeah, I don't remember that coming up very surprisingly, because soap
Well,
was
and SNL, I guess, would maybe in 1981 it was on the verge of not being quality, but
right.
And I'm sure he was fine with that show. But.
Yeah, I thought soap was kind of like the poster child for controversial.
I mean, controversial, but in terms of it seems like something critics would have liked.
Yeah.
Whereas Three's Company and Charlie's Angels,
Right,
especially, and Dallas sort of, like, yeah, he did specifically mention Dallas.
Yeah.
He only liked two things about Dallas.
Right.
Larry Hagman's acting as JR, and Barbara Del Getty.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And didn't he say like the Who Shot JR? The writing was atrocious. And
yes.
Like specifically,
right.
Like went at that one. So that was pretty cool. I just mean I think I'm surprised soap didn't come up more often. I mean, maybe it wasn't quite as popular as those other shows, but I would have expected soap more than even like Love Boat or something like that, because soap was actually going out of its way to present issues that weren't necessarily being talked about on television, and treating them in a humorous way.
Right.
So, but they only had like an hour, and a lot of MASH references to make, and
yes.
So I thought this was pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, we can add Phil to our list of effective broadcasters.
Yes.
Along with Dave and Tom Snyder.
Yeah.
And Skip Stevenson.
Effective Midwestern
yes.
Broadcasters.
Right, yeah. And, of course, Alf when he hosted The Tonight Show.
Yep, Alf definitely had that Midwestern sensibility and that boyish charm. I did check out a few other Donahues, and they're surprisingly entertaining. And again, we kind of get that time capsule thing that comes back on the show. Like, some of these issues are still relevant today, like you said. And this like, they were talking about specific shows, which is interesting, especially interesting to us. But some of these topics are still a little. I think they're still relevant. Although I think, as we said earlier, some of the tools we have and there's so much more information about stuff now.
Yeah.
That it's maybe it might be harder in a weird way. I think it's harder for parents to monitor their kids because of all the preponderance of devices and things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's easier for parents to be engaged if they want to because there's so much information. There's really no excuse for not knowing about some of this stuff.
Right. Like the Love Boat is about sex.
Yes. I mean, it's not the nature boat or
No.
the science boat. It's the Love Boat.
The science boat.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be an interesting show.
Yeah. Different scientists come on and
Yeah.
maybe
Do
a physicist
experiments.
and a biologist work together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Work together.
Right. I'll bet. Innuendo about biology. Like,
Yeah.
I've never known much about biology, but I'm certainly interested in it. Oh, you say the craziest things.
Charo could sing a song about
Yeah, about the periodic table.
right.
Nobody could say the periodic table like Charo. No. That's for sure. Do we have any callers on the line?
No, unfortunately we don't.
There's comments about
yeah.
Phil Donahue? Okay.
No. But I did mean to say that though. I like that he goes in the audience like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I always liked when Letterman did that.
Yeah.
But, and it seems like maybe the format is first segment is just him and the guests, and then he was in the audience by the second segment.
Yeah, yeah.
And kind of going back and forth, but
Right.
but that's good. It's much better than the
Like
having them
just
come
go
to
up a-
microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a cool visual.
Yeah.
And it gives Phil the opportunity to pull the mic away if they're rambling on or
Yes,
something like
yeah.
that, too.
Yeah.
It gives him more control over it. And that's another thing that I was kind of reading about him. Is it seems like he was pretty hands-on and, just had a vested interest in the show. I mean, he had researchers and stuff, but it seemed like he kind of had an active role. Although this is something I didn't remember. Apparently, like at some point in the 80s, it seemed like he started getting a little lazy. Mm-hmm. And he actually did something, I don't remember this at all, like he taped a couple of weeks of ghost shows where he wasn't actually on set, but they would have the guests and like staffers would be like moving the microphones or something like that. And I don't know if he did intros or wraparounds or something, but maybe they did it as an experiment, and it didn't go over well apparently. So they did episodes of Donahue without Donahue being there in the studio.
Did they film bits of him later?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to.
Or there was no host?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe they had. I'm thinking maybe he did voiceover or something.
Yeah.
And they had just somebody like standing in for him. But what a bizarre thing that is. I mean, how would he think that would even work? What would Gary Deeb have said about that?
You lost it, Phil.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah. That didn't seem like one of the greater parts of his legacy, but I guess he abandoned it to his credit once it didn't work.
Maybe it's after he met Marlo. And
Yeah, maybe.
she's like, you need to take more time off.
Yeah. But I can't leave the show.
You've done like 5,000 of them.
Yeah. Oh,
You've
come
done
on.
this one
Yeah.
topic 300 times. Well,
Yeah.
You can't.
Marlo, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to have the show that everybody put without me be... Wait a minute.
Johnny does it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's something like... It's kind of funny, like, late night... Why do late night talk show hosts have guest hosts, but, like, daytime talk
Right.
shows never did have guest hosts? Well, no, that's not true, is it? I guess Mike Douglas had people sitting in with him.
Yeah, and the Regis et al. Show
True.
as guest host.
Okay, I guess the chat show would.
Yeah. But these talk shows also tend to, I think, don't they kind of take the summer off?
Yeah, I think,
They follow more like a game show schedule, or not
Right.
even a game show schedule because they film in blocks, but they, would take the summer off and show
Right.
repeats.
Yeah, just too bad. You wouldn't actually need to. And you're not being topical, so you don't need to actually take vacation time. I would have liked the idea of having a substitute host on the Donahue show.
Sure.
For Phil Donahue.
Yeah.
And somebody trying to do it like the same way as him, though, but
Right.
just going out in the audience and stuff.
Yeah. Skip Stevenson.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's actually how Oprah got her start.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, she filled in once and it was all over.
I guess there might have been a little, I don't know, there's a little tension. But I know Oprah once said like something like, oh, everybody assumed that they told me that I was, crazy to go up against Phil Donahue and that would never work. And look what happened. So she pretty much did supplant Phil as the king of
Yeah.
Well, I guess Oprah was never the king of daytime.
No.
Well, she was. She was the king and the queen, I guess.
And another show, in fact, Sally Jesse Raphael,
Ah, yes, yes.
which I think was produced by the same company as Donahue.
Ah, like the Metro Media.
Yeah. And so there was some internal competition.
A feud, you might say.
Maybe. Who had the bigger glasses?
I don't know. I have to go to the videotape on that one.
Yeah. She got a little into the trashy end of things, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She certainly did. I mean, so I hear.
So, right.
That's so,
You haven't
so
watched
they say.
any on
No.
Roku channel or anything?
No.
Yeah.
So they say in the trades, I think, report on that. I remember reading a column or two in the trades about that.
Yeah. All right. We're going to keep talking, but you're not going to hear any of it as the credits roll.
Yes,
And,
of course.
and we'll be back again.
This episode brought to you by No One. The campaign to clean up Battle of the Network shows successfully boycotted all our potential sponsors for this controversial episode, and we're stuck footing the bill. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BATNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.